동네에서 사람 죽어나가는 거.
가짜 진상이 사람들이라.
아까 무당한테 댕겨왔네. 집안에 귀신이 들었대야.
그놈이랑 뭔 연관이 있는 거요? 그냥 반 사람 아니오.
여긴 못 들어오는데.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Mask of the Slasher. This week we're going to be covering the 2015 movie The Wailing. This movie came from Korea. So there are names that we cannot pronounce, and we're not going to butcher them.
Yeah, out of respect, we're just not even going to attempt it. It's pretty straightforward as far as who the characters are, so
Yeah.
I think we'll be fine.
Exactly. We'll be cool.
Yeah.
Everything's cool. Everything's cool.
Everything's cool.
So, yeah. So this movie was a movie that Josh kept hounding me about for months. He kept saying, "Oh, we gotta watch it. Oh, God." And I was like, okay, yeah. And I probably procrastinated because of subtitles. And because obviously this is going to have subtitles. And I just didn't want to deal with that.
Well, yeah, you have to be in the mood for it, I think.
Yeah.
And plus, you take such copious notes on these movies. It's hard. I can imagine it would have been difficult to try and sit there and take notes on a movie and try to read the subtitles and not miss anything.
Exactly. I mean, if it's a movie I've seen before, like Ju-on or Battle Royale, Suicide Club, any of those,
Right.
I know what happens.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's just me filling in blanks. But this time, being the first time watching it, yeah. And it was a movie that took a lot of paying attention to, not just because of the subtitles, but because there was a lot of things going on. This movie was not a slow burn.
No.
So we're going to go through the movie. Yep, there's spoilers, as always.
Surprise.
So if you don't want to know what happens, it's not like it's really going to matter because our description is never a complete description regardless.
Yeah.
You'll still be just fine watching it,
yeah.
afterwards.
Oh,
But
yeah.
if you really, really going to have a problem with it, see you later.
Yep, go back and
Yeah.
come back.
Come on back afterwards. Okay. So The Wailing, this movie starts out with just an older man sitting there fishing, just chilling out, putting a worm on a hook, and and I'm just waiting for him to like poke himself. And,
Right.
Anyway, that was it though. That was we're like, all right, okay, cool. And so the next scene though, you meet our main character. He is a police officer. He is a father of a little girl who's probably about 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there. We don't know. We don't have kids. And then his mother-in-law and his wife also live in the same house. This man wakes up to a phone call. Like I said, he's a police officer. They're saying, hey, you got to come to this whatever scene. And so he's like, oh, I got to go. Somebody's dead. And the family just keeps asking.
Yeah, and they make him, and the mother-in-law makes him stop and eat.
Yeah, she's like, no,
he
you
goes.
have to eat. He's like, I have to go. And she's like, no. So of course he's late to the scene,
Right.
But he does get to the scene and it's raining and shitty outside. He forgot his raincoat, of course. He's kind of a goofy fella.
Yeah.
But that's probably because nobody respects him.
Right.
Right. But yeah, he's showing up to the scene that is just chaos. Mud, rain, and chaos.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they've apprehended the gentleman that committed the murders, and he just looks like a corpse, basically, just like a diseased corpse sitting there. And at first, you said you thought he was dead, and I kind of thought the same thing, to be honest with you.
Well,
he just looks bad.
The handcuffs kind of blended in with his gray-ass skin, so, I didn't see it. He was sitting down on, like, the porch and the steps, so he just looked like he was just slumped over and dead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I thought he was one of the victims at first.
Yeah. So the police officer, he gets called over to the room where, unfortunately, this family had been massacred. In the background, you can hear, it's either a family member or friend, somebody saying, why did you do this? And so we know that the guy who looks like a zombie, he's the one that killed everybody inside.
Yes.
So it's kind of a sucky situation, and they're just trying to figure out what it is, because it doesn't make any sense. Well, the police officer's kind of scanning the scene, though. You see other, people, onlookers and whatever, because these people have no sense of personal space. And anyway, they're just hovering.
They are.
But you see the man from the beginning just kind of,
fisherman.
Yeah, just chilling there, and it's just kind of like, oh, that's a little weird, And that's where we continue on to the police station.
Yes. So the police officer and his partner are at the police station. They're kind of gossiping. One theory about this murder was that the guy that did it got into some mushrooms or psilocybin, you know, and kind of ridiculous. But they're also talking about this fisherman, and we find out that he's a Japanese man, and they're just very suspicious of him.
They're really dwelling on that subject, and pretty racist situation going on there, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But there's a storm outside. I mean, like I said, it was raining earlier. It rains a lot in this movie.
Yes.
It's very humid and rainy there. And the power goes out, and they're just like, oh, damn it, you know, they never fix anything around here. And him and his coworker are just goofy bastards.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it's crazy. Anyway, so at that point, they're getting ready to try to fix this, go outside, and suddenly there is a naked, bewildered woman outside the glass door.
Right.
And they just freak out
Yeah.
and go and hide behind. It was so funny. I was like, what kind of officers are you?
Right.
You know, they were scared of this woman. It was just, oh, it was hilarious. Anyway, one goes out to check, and she's not there
She's
anymore.
gone, yep. And so the next thing that happens now is there's another murder. It's first being investigated as a house fire, but after they examine the corpses, they realize that these people had actually been stabbed prior to the house being set on fire.
Yeah.
And they've come to find out that the woman that committed this murder and set the house on fire is the woman that they saw that night during the power outage. So now the police officer, he's guarding this crime scene, this burned down house. And meanwhile, there's this woman in a white dress kind of crouched near them, near the two officers, and she's just pelting them with rocks.
Yeah, just being annoying, really. But not like aggressively, just like, hey, hey. And they're just like, what do you want?
Right.
You know, and she won't stop and whatever. And the two officers, you know, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, essentially, they're talking about these things. And they're like, you know, it's just really strange. And they're talking about the fact that the two people that killed, you know, these families, they both have some sort of skin situation going
like a
on.
rash,
It's pretty gnarly. If you've ever seen a mermaid in a manhole, yeah, it's gross like that, except you can't paint with the pus. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go find it. It's gross. Anyway, so one officer says to the other, you know, why don't you go find the dermatologist in town and see if there's any sort of connection to this, whatever. And the main officer stays there, and this woman still just continues with rocks. And it splits to like a few minutes later, and he's just got this huge mound of rocks around him. It is so funny to me.
Yeah.
And finally, he's just like, what do you want? You know, and is approaching her. And finally, she starts telling the story.
Yeah. At this point, she kind of brings him into the house. He doesn't really
What's
want
left of it.
He's very apprehensive about going in and following her, but he does. And she tells him that the Japanese man is, in fact, behind all these strange things that are going on and these murders. And at this point, he's like, oh, I have a witness now. This is going to be my big case. Well, he goes to call his partner about it, and she disappears. Now, he starts to look for her, and at this point he sees the Japanese man just wearing a loincloth and kind of comes at him. He's got red eyes, he comes at him, and then the officer wakes up in his house like it had just been a dream. But then later on, you know, not too much after this, they talk to a hunter that lives in the village, and he corroborates it, saying, hey, I saw this guy too. I was, he was carrying a deer, trying to carry a deer that he had killed, and he fell and comes to, and he sees the Japanese man in the loincloth gnawing on the corpse of this deer, and then, you know, he kind of comes after the hunter as well. So now they've got, you know, now they do have some sort of witness, you know, to what happened.
Yeah, and they're talking to this man, and at first they didn't really take him seriously, and he's like, no, really. And when they go out to the site where he's saying that this happened, it's another funny moment in this movie. Like I said, it's hot, it's humid, and by the time they get up this hill, which is in a covered forest, but still it's very humid, and if you've ever lived in humidity, it's like walking in a hot crotch.
Yeah.
That is what Josh said to me many years ago, and I was like, yep, that's probably it. But anyway, they got their pants pulled up and just trying to, it's so funny because they're so out of shape.
Yeah.
They're like the worst cops ever. That's really it. They're scared of people, and they can't handle anything.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, they go and they check out the situation. And during this, that poor man
He
falls again.
So their whole thing is now they've got to take him. They don't even get to do what they needed to do because they've got to take this guy back into town because he's fallen again.
And he keeps hitting his head on this rock, and oh, poor bastard. They're really trying to, you know, they're racking their brain as to what's going on here. And, you know, starting to hear about stuff that's somewhat demonic. It seems that way. So the other officer, it's a relative of his. I don't know if it's a cousin. I can't remember.
I can't remember either.
But anyway, they meet him on the side of the road
and
pick him up, and he's a deacon, so he's a priest in training.
Yeah.
And they go and find the Japanese man's house.
Right.
And he's basically just told to be on the lookout because he does not feel good about this. The Japanese man is not there. They're breaking into his house.
Yeah, without a warrant or any kind of official anything.
And then you've got like Cujo.
Yeah.
He's wicked. So how the houses are built there, from what I'm seeing in this movie at least, is that all the rooms are separated, but all their doors open to the front to a porch. So picture that. Okay. So one of the two officers, he goes into the kitchen area and is just trying to find stuff, whatever's going on, trying to figure out what the situation is. And he sees like an altar, and that's kind of bananas. The other guy, he's in basically like his bedroom, I guess. I don't know if you want to call it that. Yeah. It's pretty gross. But anyway, he goes into this closet, and the entire closet is covered in photographs of people. And in those photographs are going to be some of the people that have died already, the ones that had killed their families. And the other officer, he's very bewildered by the situation. He is thrown off. And just then, the dog gets free because it's just chained down to a piece of cement that's kind of underground, but it's a big dog.
Right.
He gets free, and he starts attacking the deacon. And so just then, the Japanese man shows up and calls the dog off. But what he sees is because all these people are freaking out about this dog, they've destroyed these rooms. Just thrown tables and broke down the screens of the... Oh, my gosh. It's so bad.
It's a disaster.
And it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
And the man is just stands there and stares at him.
Yeah.
And the guys just kind of leave. And just
it's like they kind of leave in shame, yet at the same time, they know that something's going on because they found his altar that has like goat heads and shit on it.
Yeah.
They found all his photos of these, like, basically are like before and after photos of these people that he's preyed upon, at
it's
this
like
point.
the worst glamour shots in existence.
Exactly.
It's not the one you want to go to.
At this point now, the police officer's daughter starts acting strangely, and the mom and the mother-in-law are very upset about this. She seems ill. She's not acting like herself. She's very aggressive and what have you, and cursing and things of that nature.
And by the way, this is before she got sick. She was already very ornery.
Yeah.
There's a scene where she just walks into the police station and just farts right in front of her dad. And a long... It's hilarious. But yeah, she's just an ornery little girl. Yeah. And so by her different behaviors, like she's eating food that she would never eat before, like fish.
Right.
And just horsing down food where before the father had to like force her to eat.
Right.
I'm like, I wouldn't want that seaweed either. But yeah, she's starting to get a little
Yeah.
And the officer's getting suspicious after seeing what's going on at this Japanese man's house.
Right.
He's like, okay, you're crossing a line, bro.
Exactly.
So
now the officer's pissed off, obviously, at this point, because now he believes that the guy's preying on his daughter. He's going to be the next victim here. And so they go back to his house yet again with the deacon again, and they discover, of course, that all the stuff is gone. The photos, everything just gone. And the Japanese man, probably should be mentioned that the deacon speaks Japanese as well. That's why they brought him along. Should have said that earlier, but it will.
Yeah.
Anyway,
now you know.
You get the idea.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to have a conversation. And of course, the Japanese man tells him, I burned all that stuff, whatever. And at that point, the dog gets loose once again, this killer dog that he's got. And unfortunately, the officer mortally wounds this dog with a pickaxe. And folks, if you're upset by animal things, I would recommend skipping this part.
A lot.
You won't miss out on too much by skipping that little piece of things. I would recommend it if that type of thing upsets you, because it is quite brutal. It's not shown, but it's very much, you know what happened.
There's sound.
Yeah,
there's
sound.
What
happened.
And it doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And the main officer says to the Japanese man, you've got 3 days, get out of here. We know what you're doing, blah, 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 blah. And so everybody leaves, and this Japanese man, he's pissed.
Yeah.
He doesn't show
he
it.
Doesn't show it.
He's pretty glossed over. But the following morning, the opening to the property of the police officers, like an open gate, whatever, there's a dead goat that has just been gutted and is hanging upside down.
Yeah.
And poor goatie.
Yeah.
It's probably Black Phillip. It kind of looked like Black Phillip.
Yes.
He had another role in life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so bro's like, aw, shit, Now, we should say amongst this, like we said earlier, the mother-in-law, she's very pushy. Mm-hmm. And as the daughter is getting sicker and sicker, she keeps saying, there's my neighbor was telling me about a shaman that we should hire and take care of this. And the officer's just he's trying to keep control of his family. Yeah. And because this woman has his balls in a jar.
Right.
So he's trying, but he finally is like, okay.
All right, fine.
Yeah, and it's expensive, too, on top of that. So they call the shaman.
Yes. So they call the shaman, and he attempts a ritual that's supposedly going to bring death on the Japanese man.
Yeah.
Because they believe he's some sort of ghost or spirit. You know, and as they're performing this ritual, which is just crazy, and I don't know how authentic this is. You know,
I don't know either.
in reference to anything in Korean culture, but it is just bananas, this ritual he's got going on. He's got all these assistants doing stuff.
Like a lot.
There's chickens, there's goats, and again, if you don't like animal stuff, folks.
Well, and on top of that, simultaneously in the movie, the Japanese man is also having a ritual.
Yep.
And there are chickens, live chickens hanging up by their feet. And so all of that looks incredibly real.
Yeah.
And so be prepared for that. I had a hard time. That's when I started writing a lot of notes.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to see the screen.
It's very intense.
Yes. But this, I mean, you've seen The Exorcist before, I'm sure. So, you know, that Regan's going through some major shit during her exorcism. This is essentially the same thing. It's an exorcism.
Yeah.
And this little girl is just getting pummeled by this. You know, it's not as easy as just putting some holy water on her and whatever. And the family is just like, that's it. We're done, you know. And the officer comes out of her room and is just like, stop it, and knocks all this shit over. And we're all like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
You know, you think that's what's, you know, that's some bad shit.
Yeah.
So they take her to the hospital.
Obviously now the little girl's in the hospital. She's on, you know, she's got hooked up to the breathing apparatus and all that kind of stuff. Officer's at his wit's end at this point. He gathers up some of his friends, including the deacon and his partner from the police. And they go back to the Japanese man's house yet again. And this time, you know, there's an angry mob. They've got weapons, the whole bit.
Yeah.
Well, the Japanese man, once again, has kind of slipped through their fingers at this point. But he has, at the same time, reanimated the corpse of one of his victims that approaches them as a zombie and attacks them. And at that point, it just kind of turns into chaos. You know, the zombie is attacking them. They're hacking at it and beating on it with everything they've got. It's not going down. Finally, it does. And, you know, they chase, they're looking for the Japanese guy, but he's kind of hanging off the side of a cliff.
Yeah.
You know, and they can't find him, so they don't know what's going on. So they leave, you know, very upset that they, you know, nothing came of this other than they all got their ass kicked by this zombie. Meanwhile, we see the Japanese man come in hiding, and he gets there. The woman in white appears and appears to be chasing after him. So the Japanese man, now he's being chased by this woman. He runs out into the road and gets the officer's driving a van and smacks right into him and seemingly kills him. They pick up his corpse and just kind of toss him over the guardrail.
Yeah, off a cliff.
Very unceremoniously dispose of his body. And they get back to the hospital to find that the daughter's health is improved. She's talking. You know, she seems to be doing well, and they think it's over.
Yeah. In between all of this, though, the shaman, we see him again, and he is reading, it's rice grains and runes, and he calls the officer, and he's just like, where's your daughter, whatever, because he had said something when he was reading those that was a little suspicious. He said something like, oh, they fell for it, or something like that.
Yeah.
So you're starting to go, something's not right.
Yep.
Something's not right. So they take the little girl back home. And everything seems cool, you know, but the shaman's trying to contact the officer, and they finally get in touch with each other, and they kind of just miss connections.
Yeah.
The shaman goes to the police officer's house, vice versa. While this is happening, though, the little girl is once again getting weirdly sick.
Yeah.
Not like before. It's some funky shit.
Yeah.
And she is sitting in the kitchen just horsing down every bit of food, and it's like, no. And then you just see her look up at a knife. And her mom and grandma are just sitting there watching her while this is happening, just not knowing what to do about it. I'm like, tie her down, damn it.
Exactly.
But anyway, all you see is her look at a knife, and then split to the next scene.
Yeah. So the shaman, as we mentioned, him and the officer kind of miss each other, and the shaman shows up at the officer's house. He approaches the entrance to the property and sees the woman in white. And as soon as he sees the woman in white, he starts profusely vomiting blood.
And pus.
Yeah, and pus. And first it's just his nose starts bleeding, and then it's just torrents of blood.
And it doesn't even look fake.
Yeah, it actually looks pretty real. He survives that encounter. He calls the officer and basically says, I made a mistake. The woman in white is the demon or ghost or what have you. You know, so the officer starts heading back towards town from the shamans, and you know, at this point, he gets to the property, and the woman in white is out there, kind of on the outskirts, and he confronts her. And she explains that she says, no, the Japanese man is the demon, and I've set a trap for him at your house. And she says, don't go to your house until the rooster has crowed 3 times. You know, otherwise your family will die. And so now, he's having quite the crisis here because he doesn't know who to believe. Is the shaman telling the truth? Is she, is she the demon, or is she telling the truth and the Japanese man is the demon?
Yeah.
So ultimately, the officer decides that the woman in white is the demon, and I think mainly this is because on the ground next to her, he sees his daughter's hair.
Oh, her hair barrette.
Her hair barrette, yeah.
Yeah.
And so he runs back to the house, and he gets there just before the rooster crows for the third time. He goes inside, finds his wife and mother-in-law dead, having been killed by his daughter, and then he, of course, sees his daughter who's still possessed.
Yes.
While this is going on, the deacon is trying to help because earlier, we probably should have mentioned that the officer did go to the church, and they basically told him, "Hey, we can't do anything for you, pal."
I think the deacon felt bad and knew that something was
the deacon
actually
knew
wrong.
something was wrong. So he goes back to the Japanese man's house by himself. On the property, he discovers a cave. Goes into this cave, which I would never do after all that's gone on, finds the Japanese man very much alive and confronts him at that point and asks him, "Are you the demon?"
Yeah.
And, the Japanese man photographs him, and at the same time he kind of transforms into his true form of a demon. And it's very cool looking makeup, I might add.
Yeah. He looks more like a traditional Korean or Asian art of a demon, like that would be used in theater, things like that. So it's not the typical sleek, cool looking, suave, guy. He's got a more squared face, and it's crazy looking, and his horns come up, but it's not corny looking. They didn't do weird, shitty stuff. They did a perfect job of this makeup.
It looks good.
Yeah. So, and the deacon's just kind of stunned and doesn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
Then we cut back to the officer's house, and he has been stabbed by his daughter, and he's just slowly dying.
Yep.
And just then the shaman shows back up, and he walks into the house, and he's looking around, and you're expecting him to go, "Oh, shit."
Yeah.
Nope. Motherfucker starts taking pictures.
Yep.
And we're like, they were in cahoots.
Yes.
Yes, that's what was going on. Demon and the shaman were in cahoots.
Yes, and the woman in white was trying to help the whole time.
Yes. Should have just listened to the woman.
Yeah.
Nobody ever listens to us. We're always right.
Right.
Right, Josh? We're always right.
And one thing I actually read, I was researching the film a little more on my own. There was actually a scene that was cut. I don't know if it was actually filmed or was just in the script and not actually used, but in this particular scene, it was to show that the deacon driving in a car and picking up the Japanese man and driving off. But
into the sunset.
Yeah, they left that out. So
they went to Disneyland.
So yeah.
Now this movie, there's a lot to the story. It starts off pretty lighthearted, really. I mean, despite murders and everything, there is some humor in it, and I wouldn't say it quickly changes, but they're really good at just blending that together and pulling out that humor because definitely don't want it in the end of this.
Yeah, it just keeps getting darker and heavier.
Yeah.
But it's very subtle in the way it shifts,
Exactly.
It's like things keep escalating, but it's a very subtle escalation.
Yes. And, it's, like I said, it's not a slow burn. The story, it rolls right along. There are things that we did leave out of this because we don't want to tell you everything.
Right.
Oh my gosh. But, so there is more than just what we're saying happens. But the story itself, I really had to ponder, what is the meaning behind this? Because obviously every movie, there's, an underlining story to this. And what it seemed like to me is that the officer was struggling with a lack of respect from his family, trying to be the man of the house. He was the breadwinner after all.
Yeah.
And they didn't respect him in any way. His own co-worker, his boss, nobody respected him. They all thought he was just a schmuck.
Yeah.
But on top of that, he really struggled with the religion portion of this, as well as poor rumors and racism.
Yeah.
And I think it all focused back to him being able to decide for himself and stand up for himself. Because his mother-in-law was the one who was like, "Oh, call the shaman." Well, now she's dead.
Yeah.
And then the other officers like, "Oh, we'll get the deacon," Well, he was no help. All along, the woman in white, she was the good guy in this. And that when she was just throwing those rocks, although it was funny, I think it was a way of her doing this to where he wasn't looking for that help.
Yeah.
Like he did with with the religious stuff, with the shaman and the priests and all that stuff. It wasn't like that. It was like, you can have my help, but you have to, ask me.
Yeah.
I'm here to do it for you, but, And what I had read about in the Korean culture is that ghosts, they stick around to help out with unfinished business. So in this case, obviously she's just trying to solve this situation and get rid of this demon and stop this continual thing because he's just going to move to another town.
Right.
So I think that's really what it came down to was, that man just being able to stand his ground. And in the end of this, a very sad ending to this, but the officer, he's, withering away, dying, and he says, don't worry, I'm the police officer, I'll take care of you. So he's still trying to say it at the end that, he has control over it when obviously he doesn't.
Right.
And so it's pretty heartbreaking story, really.
Oh, yeah.
Because, and I've never liked it when there's unhappy endings to anything.
Yeah.
And this just shows that shit's going to continue until somebody can think for themselves and take their own actions. And a lot of people struggle with that these days.
Yeah.
So, and, religion interferes with that, racism, rumors, all of that makes it to where people don't think for themselves.
Yeah, and even though their suspicions were ultimately correct, those suspicions still led them down the wrong path. You know?
Well, and it led them to this man for a bad reason. It wasn't just like, because, if you believe in Satan or demons or any of that stuff, they can take on any form. So it didn't have to necessarily be a Japanese guy. You could have Bob from Tennessee,
Right.
he could be hanging out fishing, and so it didn't really matter. But because these people were so close-minded, then and the mushrooms thing too, because that's another common thing these days. Oh, well, the drugs, they're bad. And it's like, no, they're not. So I think that's really what it comes down to, though, is that he just needed to think for himself.
Yeah.
I think it's a well-rounded story. It has a lot for everybody. It's not a slow burn. I think the only thing that people would really struggle with, of course, is the subtitles.
Yeah.
There's not overdubbing. I tried. But I was glued to this movie, which I didn't think I was going to be because I was so reluctant to watch it to begin with. And I was tired and I had to take notes, but I was taking notes the next day because I had to stop just so I could watch the movie and actually enjoy it. So, and I hope someday again that I'll get to watch it
without taking
notes. Yeah. And then you could see even more stuff that we may have missed. One of the things we later talked about was that there's the man who is fishing at the beginning. And at one point, is it the shaman that says it?
Yeah, the officer is asking, well, why was my daughter, why was she chosen? You know, and the shaman says to him basically that she wasn't chosen. He says, when you go fishing, do you know what you're going to catch when you reel it in? And he's basically just saying the demon is fishing for victims the same way as a person would, and not knowing necessarily what he's going to get. Yeah.
So there's a lot of little hidden things like that. And like I said, the woman in white, she's wearing an army coat, and it says something on the patch on it, and I don't remember what it says, but they flash through that and show where it's been in, multiple scenes in this movie. So you do have to pay attention to those things. So it'll probably take a couple watches to really get it all, and I can't wait to watch it again so I can see all that stuff and pay more attention to it. I think the only thing I didn't like about it, of course, was the animals.
Yeah.
That was very hard. The dog they didn't really kill a dog in this movie.
Yeah, clearly.
I can't say much for the chickens or the goats, but it's a different culture. It's not our life,
right?
But I just don't like it.
Yeah.
I'm just not a fan of the situation. So, but I was able to get past it pretty quickly because the rest of the story was so good.
Yeah.
I think that was more in there for shock value and to really drive home what was happening.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I just thought this movie was so compelling, and it's 2.5 hours, but you'd never know it. It doesn't feel like a 2.5 hour movie.
No.
It's just so well put together. The performances are great. The actor that plays the police officer is just so likable.
Oh, I love him.
I just think he did such a fantastic job, and really everybody in this movie is very good.
Yeah.
The performances are all excellent. I'm just always blown away by a movie that looks so great and just has great performances, and I just feel like it's the complete package,
It definitely is good cinematography, good everything.
Yeah.
It didn't feel old and dated.
Right.
We recommend you go watch it. If you've already seen it, what did you think of it? Did the same stuff bother you that bothered me? Because poor little chickens. But what did you think of this movie? I mean, did you see the same message that I saw in it? That's what I read from it. But if you found something different, let me know, because I really would like to know. So, anyway, I think that's it for this one.
Yeah.
We'll be back next week once again, as we always are. And so we'll see you then.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.